This is the BBC World Service, the world's radio station. Hello, I'm Zainab Badawi. You're listening to the World Debate on the BBC World Service. I'm on Wall Street in New York, the centre of global finance in the country which is at the heart of free market capitalism. Smart-dressed men and women are hurrying all around me, going back to their offices, dashing to meetings. They have a spring in their step. The financial crash a decade ago that sparked an angry backlash is seemingly a distant memory. And the rich just keep on getting richer. In the last 10 years, the number of billionaires has doubled. Inequality means the poor have unequal access to healthcare, education and other basic needs. Is the system broken, or is free market capitalism the only way to lift billions out of poverty? These are the questions my panel and audience here in New York will be grappling with. Join us after the news for the World Debate. BBC News with Sue Montgomery. There have been violent clashes in the streets of Hong Kong between protesters and police on the 17th consecutive weekend of demonstrations calling for a direct democracy in the territory. Tens of thousands gathered in a park near Hong Kong's parliament to mark the 5th anniversary since the start of the student-led umbrella movement, which had similar aims. John Sudworth reports.
5 years on, they were back. Thousands of protesters chanting, carrying banners and burning a Chinese flag on the spot where the umbrella movement began. The everyday object gained iconic status because of its use as a shield against the tear gas and pepper spray. They were in use again today, with the anniversary quickly descending into violence.
President Trump has again accused leading Democrats of presidential harassment as an impeachment inquiry against him gathers pace. In a tweet, Mr. Trump described 6 Congress leaders as do-nothing Democratic savages. Peter Bowes reports.
Next week, Kurt Volker, the U.S. Special Envoy for Ukraine, who resigned from his post after being cited in the whistleblower complaint against the president, is among 5 officials due to testify on the matter before Congress. He's said to have met with the Ukrainian leadership to help navigate the demands that President Trump made of Mr. Zelensky. Public opinion in the U.S. appears to be moving in favour of the impeachment inquiry, with new polls suggesting about half the nation supports the action.
The former president of Zimbabwe, Robert Mugabe, has been buried in a simple ceremony in his home village of Kutama. He was given a state funeral, but his family resisted official plans to bury him in a mausoleum being built for him at the National War Heroes Shrine in the capital, Harare. This report from Shinganyoka.
The copper-coloured coffin was lowered into a grave as Robert Mugabe's wife Grace and children looked on. Very few of his former comrades attended. His final resting place, a small courtyard next to a pond within the family compound. Few would have envisaged that a once towering figure in the liberation struggle who thrived in the spotlight would have such a low-key burial.
Voting has ended in Afghanistan's presidential election. The Election Commission has extended the voting by 2 hours due to long queues of people waiting to cast their ballots. The main candidates are the incumbent, Ashraf Ghani, and the chief executive, Abdullah Abdullah. Turnout so far is reported to be lower than 5 years ago, with many staying at home due to security concerns. At least 1 person was killed and 27 others wounded in suspected Taliban attacks. World News from the BBC. A judge in Brazil has issued a restraining order against the former Attorney General, Rodrigo Jano, after he admitted that he once carried a gun inside the Supreme Court to kill one of the justices. In the 4 years he served as Brazil's chief public prosecutor, Mr. Jano led the prosecution for corruption of 3 former presidents, Dilma Rousseff, Michel Temer, and Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. Events have been held on both sides of the Baltic to mark the 25th anniversary of the worst peacetime disaster in European waters, the sinking of the Estonia. The ship went down in heavy seas on its way from Tallinn to Stockholm, killing more than 800 people, most of them from Sweden and Estonia. The Swedish Prime Minister, Stefan Löfven, addressed the ceremony in Stockholm.
Estoniakatastrofen skakade om vårt land.
The Estonia disaster shook our country, changed lives and affected people in different ways. Today, I'm especially thinking of those who lost someone they loved when the Estonia sank 25 years ago.
The Estonia sank after its bow door and visor came loose in the storm. Wildlife officials in Sri Lanka say they found 3 more dead wild elephants, raising the number of carcasses found to 7 in the past few days. The animals were found at a forest reserve in central Sri Lanka. It's not clear what caused the deaths, but officials suspect they may have been poisoned by angry villagers for destroying crops. Italian police have arrested a well-known Sicilian chef on suspicion of drug dealing after discovering 2 marijuana plants in his garden and an array of specially infused culinary creations in his kitchen. They included olives, wine, coffee and tuna, all flavoured with the drug. The chef, Carmelo Chiaramente, is reported to have told police that he was an agri-food consultant of Mediterranean cuisine of the 3rd millennium. BBC News.
Welcome to the Lincoln Center in Manhattan. I'm Zainab Badawi and you're listening to the World Debate on the BBC World Service. We'll be asking, what are the reasons behind the rise in global inequality? Does it matter? And if so, what can we do about it? I have a brilliant panel to wade through these difficult waters, as well as an audience of young leaders from various sectors around the world who've been convened by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Let me tell you who's on our panel. So, the Sudanese-born businessman and philanthropist Mo Ibrahim has been described as Mr. Africa. He built a fortune in the telecoms industry and then turned to promoting development on the continent. Sigrid Kaag, Minister for Foreign Trade and Development Cooperation in the Netherlands. She has a long background in international aid through her long career at the United Nations. Kay James is President of the Heritage Foundation, an influential American conservative think tank. She grew up in relative poverty in Virginia and says those experiences shaped her worldview. And John Fugelsang is an American political comedian, actor, broadcaster and commentator. He's made a documentary, in fact, to see if the American dream is still alive in the face of rising inequality. That is our panel. Welcome to you all. Okay, panel, quick fire question at the beginning. The statistics show that the richest 1% globally own nearly half of the world's wealth. Is there a problem with that? Mo Ibrahim.
I think it depends. What those rich guys first got the money, they stole it, they killed, what they did to get this money. Secondly, what they are doing. I mean, we have here one of the richest people in the world sitting here who giving his money really for good causes. We are really grateful for that.
And you too.
So I don't, well, exactly. So I really think...
You were being a bit modest there, weren't you?
Yeah, this is not self-serving statement. This is genuine. It really depends on what we do. And so let us not just run away with slogans like that.
Okay, so you don't have a problem with it, basically. It depends what you do with it and how you acquire that wealth. Okay, that's very clear. John?
Well, I think that the question that we face is not so much about the benevolent, empathetic billionaires here. It's about the billionaires who wouldn't be caught dead here and are indifferent to the struggles of others. The question we face is not so much about income inequality, but dramatically uneven income growth over many years. And the question, I believe, facing the billionaires of the world is, are they willing to take a smaller piece of an expanding pie, or do they want to just go for a larger piece of a shrinking pie?
Okay, well, we'll put that to Mo. I know you're not a spokesperson for billionaires, but we will put that to you in a moment. I don't know, I'm sorry. I just say, let's see what Kay James has to say about this. Do you have a problem with the rich?
Absolutely not. As a matter of fact, I'd like to be one of them. And quite frankly, I think that I absolutely agree with Mo. It depends on how the money was earned, and it depends on how the money is spent. But do I have a problem with people having the opportunity to work hard, make a great deal of money, and share the wealth? Absolutely not.
Minister Sigrid.
Well, I agree with the comment as how you earn it and what you do with it, but it's also the system. It's the systemic exclusion that actually puts people way behind. So it's about the opportunity to participate. So I'm not so interested in the top tier. I'm interested in the bottom of the pyramid and the middle layer that actually has no chance to participate anymore.
So, John, you seem to have a problem with it, but just explain to me, what is the problem with that richest 1%? Whether they wish to spend their money, does it have a direct impact on the other 99% and whether they can, you know, increase their earning power and so on? The two are not related, are they?
No, I don't think you can ever have a maximum wage. I have no problem with the existence of billionaires whatsoever. However, what we're looking at in our culture is the concentration of wealth, and we've seen growth slow down because of it. Philanthropy can solve many, many of the world's problems. It can inspire many people to be more giving, but it can't just be sharing. It has to be strategic, direct philanthropy that doesn't just go to address a symptom of a problem, but that can go to address the rigged system that created the problem in the first place.
How do they do that? I mean, by and large, they have bought into the capitalist system. A lot of them obviously invest their wealth in that and so on. You're saying that they should be careful voting for Christmas and try to disband the system that has enriched them?
No, they should not do that. However, if they don't get wise to what's going to happen, other people will demand that they do that. And I do think that we don't want to have a class war globally. No one wants to see that. I think that, again, philanthropy can alleviate many of the problems, but it is the rigged system that keeps people struggling. And here in America, the richest country in the world, we have millions of people who are sort of in a reality show that's called Food, Medicine, Rent, Take Two.
Okay. Mo, you mentioned philanthropy, and as I said, you are a big philanthropist operating on the continent of Africa principally. Do you think that is absolutely incumbent on very, very wealthy people, the billionaires and so on, to use their money to better society and to try to combat the inequalities we have?
No doubt. As human beings and citizens, we really need to work for humanity. Absolutely. I don't want my children to live in a society divided by class, divided by opportunity, by people. That's not a world worth living in. Now, while I'm saying that, I know there's, you know, I mean, Bill started this pledge. We have like 130, 150 billionaires said, okay, I'm going to give half my money during my lifetime. That's great. I don't think that will solve the problem. We should not look for philanthropy to solve the problem of inequality. This is a systemic problem. This is an issue of policy and structures. This is an issue of opportunities. Will all the children have the same opportunity to have access to decent education, decent health? That is where the problem, mobility in the society, opportunity.
Is it just a problem of a system, Kay? I mean, it's also one of ideology, isn't it? And I'm thinking in particular of Thomas Piketty, the very influential French economist who's just written a book called Capital and Ideology, and he says that the capitalist system inherently leads to accelerating inequality because, obviously, without getting too economically about it, you know, as long as the return on investment or on capital is greater than growth, that's going to sustain the capital
We also
system.
know that capitalism has created an environment for growth where poverty rates actually go down. We produce at the Heritage Foundation an index of economic freedom. And one of the things that we have discovered as we have tracked this, one of the things that we have discovered is that the freer the economy is, the more human flourishing you have. And so what we see when you have deregulation, less corruption, more transparency in government, that the capitalism under those circumstances, you see less poverty rates and you see people rise and you see human flourishing. And so I think it's good when we have our discussion to actually take a look at that data, that set of data.
But shouldn't you have very, very clear safety nets in free market capitalist systems for those who just simply can't swim with the tide?
Well, we do have safety nets, and I think those safety nets are important.
They're not rigorous enough, though, often, are they?
In some countries, perhaps not.
Well, allow me, Kate, to say something about capitalist system. I think capitalist system, liberal democracy is in trouble. And in my view, one of the major problems that happened to us was the collapse of the Soviet Union. paradoxically, because during the Cold War, we had an incentive to improve what we're doing. We looked after our people better. Then Soviet Union collapsed, there's no competition. And we said, fine, end of history. And things start to deteriorate. If you look at inequality, history with the statistics, you'll see inequality increasing from this point on.
Okay, Sigrid, you wanted to come in here?
Yeah, I mean, inclusive growth is extremely important, but most forms of economic growth are not necessarily inclusive, because if you're already not part of the chain, you don't have a chance to compete. So that capitalism as a form of being a motor of economic growth has been a starting point. But it's very clear globally, through the impact of globalization as well, and the new groups that are being excluded, including the middle classes and the lower middle classes, that people are resenting that, and they're demonstrating against it, and I think with good reason. What you need is good policies, you need good politics and politicians, and you need taxation and to fight corruption. But taxation, progressive redistribution of wealth is extremely important, particularly for the poorest and those who don't have a chance to pay their school fees, they do not have the money to pay out of pocket for health care, because the health system isn't looking after their basic social human needs. I think that's the starting point.
I'm just going to go to the question of taxes there, and I'd like to go to Danny Sriskandaraja in our audience, who is head of Oxfam GB, and of course Danny Oxfam has done a great deal of work on inequality, publishing that very landmark report on inequality with its startling statistics. What do you want to say to the panel?
That's right. I mean, Oxfam research shows that the richest 26 people in the planet own the same amount of wealth as the poorest half of the world. And I think it's fantastic of those rich people pledge to use their private wealth for public good, but we also need structural fixes, and one of the ways to fund the public services is increasing wealth taxes. Currently, only 4% of all taxes generated in the world come from wealth taxes. And I wanted to ask the panel, surely isn't it time for us to raise net wealth taxes and perhaps even aspire to a global standard for wealth taxes?
A global standard for wealth taxes. Kay, you look skeptical. So, Kay James.
Well, I'm sure it will come as a shock to no one here that the president of the Heritage Foundation sort of feels that taxing the rich is not necessarily what's going to get us out of the hole that we're in. First of all, if you tax them at an exorbitant rate, you still wouldn't have enough resources in order to do the work that we all agree so desperately needs to be done. And so there've got to be some other solutions to that. That's an easy, tax the rich, take their money, and we'll solve all the problems of the poor. That just isn't factually accurate. There's not enough money there in order to do that. So what do we do?
All right, we'll talk about what do we do, but you've rejected that particular suggestion. John?
Well, just looking at history of our country in the United States, it's not popular to say so, but I think that we are not a capitalist society. We are a blended society. And both capitalism and communism are doomed to fail on their own for the same fail-safe reason, human greed. Looking to the period in America that we call the good old days, the 1950s under President Eisenhower, capitalism and socialism flourished at the same time. A high progressive tax rate on the wealthiest Americans, massive infrastructure spending like the Interstate Highway Program. Capitalism flourishes with socialist programs like the GI Bill. Eisenhower was our last Republican president to balance a budget with a surplus in this country. We know that it helps. It can't do all of it, but we've learned dramatically in our country cutting taxes for the wealthy exacerbates the problem every time.
Having a global standard of tax wealth, which is what done is
only if you want something that works.
It's a no-brainer. Mo, I mean, one of the figures again that Oxfam gave is that in some countries, the poorest 10% pay a higher proportion of their income than the richest 10%. Surely that's not sustainable. Mo?
I mean, Danny, more important than even the wealth tax is corporate tax. You know why? Because our countries in Africa are being raped. Because multinationals don't pay taxes in Africa. And absolutely. And we need, the problem is taxation systems are based on countries. Business gone global. But every country runs their own tax system independent of the others. And doesn't work. We need a global standard here. A fairer tax system for corporation taxes, because Now, profit shifting really is hurting us tremendously. That's where real money is, my friend. And that's what we...
Okay.
So we need a new view over the whole taxation system.
Not on individuals, but the corporations, the multinational corporations. Sigrid.
Yeah, I don't think it's a or system, this system or that system. Anyway, in Europe we don't talk sort of this divide between communism or capitalism.
Exactly.
You know, our society is a little bit, I think, more mixed flows, and I belong to a progressive liberal party, so both labels don't apply to us. But I think it's very important to unpack the whole issue of taxation. It's an instrument, but it can never be the only one. And it's all about tax on wealth only, because in let's say, in societies where wealth is more fairly distributed, in like the Netherlands, most people have an income and a little bit of savings if they're lucky, and that's it. So your taxation base will always be that particular group, and you use policies, social protection networks, to lift those who are more vulnerable, to lift them up.
But
so
what about the MNCs, the multinational corporations?
Is a very sensitive, important point, and I completely agree with Mo, because that's where you can leverage additional wealth. But the tax evasion issue is very often connected to the illicit economy, sometimes, not always. And obviously you need good politics and policies. That's why I concur with Mo as well. His next point I hope he'll be making on governance. Good governance and rule of law.
She's putting words in your mouth. We'll come to that, but just sticking with the tax.
I fully agree. Just one thing I want to say also, you know, that is not only just raising taxes, is what we're going to do with this money. Are they going to use this money to fight climate change? Are they going to use this money to improve education system for the kids, improve health, or are they going to use it to buy more arms?
Okay, so it's what you do, the policies, not just raising the money. Can I just see, Kay, I mean, you agree, you said you don't want more wealth tax, but on corporations, and we know tax evasion, illegal, tax avoidance, legal, but, you know, morally questionable, and a lot of multinational corporations do seek, you know, kind of models whereby they can avoid their tax. That's not
You know what I want to see for corporations? I want to see corporations operating in an environment where they can create more jobs, where they can create more wealth, where they can create more opportunity, where people have the chance to go to work and earn an honest day's wages. So I want to see these corporations operating within an environment where they can do that. And what do we know? If you overtax a corporation, what are they going to do? They're going to leave and go someplace that has lower taxes. So I think there's a balance there. Of course they have a moral obligation to pay taxes, as anyone should. But when you overtax a corporation, you actually hurt the very people you claim you want to help.
But respectfully, we've cut taxes on corporations that outsourced all the jobs anyway.
And what has happened?
We've had stagnation.
We have had a booming economic growth. We have more jobs
Some folks.
in this country right now, and we don't want to focus so much on this country, but in this country there are more people working today than ever.
But they're not middle-class jobs. They're not middle-class jobs that allow someone to climb from poverty to the top of the economic ladder. And so much of that is dependent on the geography of where you were born.
So that group, the just about managing, sometimes referred to as the jams, I mean, they have got problems. And that comes to a point that you made, Sigrid, about income inequality. We've been talking about wealth inequality. Income inequality is something different. We've seen the backlash against executive pay. We're only 2 or 3 kilometres from Wall Street. We all saw the financial crash in 2009. People protesting, saying it's not right that these financiers pay themselves millions and millions. And Mo, you've talked a lot about this, the fact that there's got to be reform in that system because the financial crash. But people are saying after the crash, it's back to business as normal.
I think there is few positive signs among business, even, Kate. I mean, look, even the Business Roundtable in the United States, which has most of the business people there, came back now and said, you know what, guys, business only for benefit of shareholders is not viable anymore. We have to really take into account other stakeholders, society, community, workers, etc. So business people themselves understand, given what's happening around us, they cannot really keep doing what they have done before. I belong to a group of business people who say, Plan A failed. We need to find a new plan.
Well, people have got plans, haven't they, Mo? I don't know what you think. Employees on boards of companies, capping the amount of shares that any one individual can own in a company.
Carbon emission. I mean, to join our group, you have to produce an audit of your company. What are you doing when you're going to be carbon neutral? You need to check your company, your supply chains for slavery, child labor, workers' human rights, the right to organize, to have their union, etc. Gender issues, equality. This was some
kind of audit.
We insist to audit. Before you breach, you need to do it in your business first, and then you talk about it.
But what about putting people
there are
on
changes
board?
taking place.
What about putting employees, kind of having a shareholding democracy and just saying put representatives of the employees on 50% of the seats of the board? Yeah. Let's just come to Sigrid because she's not coming.
Well, actually, I feel that we're not talking, if you talk corporations, we're not talking about the lives and the opportunities of many people in developing countries. That's not about corporations. That's about having the chance to have income, to have a digital identity, to have the opportunity to get a loan from a bank and not be ripped off by the money lender, to be protected in your environment. So the corporation story, I think, is a little bit of an OECD.
Does it have no impact? Does it have no impact on the people in these developed countries?
Job creation for young people who's on the African continent. It has to do with the relevance of learning, the investments needed to create jobs. Corporations are part of it, but they're not the only ones. They will not be the homegrown type of job market you need. Agriculture is the backbone of the African continent. Agriculture, for instance, needs to be made not only efficient again, but also attractive for young people to want to work there. So you can build food systems, and you create jobs, and people stay in their own country. These, I think, are the issues
Are you saying then, Sigrid, that there is no effect, no impact on the actions of the global multinational corporations on inequality in Africa or whatever? Because Mo is clearly saying, tax these multinational corporations, they operate in Africa, they are relevant.
Well, as you can see from the EU Commission's rulings, we want corporate multinationals anyway to be taxed. To be taxed at source. I think it's a very important one, and to pay an equitable tax. But that's a global debate. That's not only exclusive to development or underdevelopment, and the opportunity to have jobs for those who need it, which is part of their self-development. So I sort of feel as we're talking about corporations and governance and who should be on the board of companies is a little bit far removed from what seems to be the story or the topic also of today's conversation.
Of global inequality.
Lack of opportunity and our drive to create equity.
Let's go to another question from the audience. Andrew Ihsan Gasnolar, trained as a lawyer in South Africa and now works as a journalist. What do you want to say to the panel?
Thank you, Zainab. You know, we started talking this session about Thomas Piketty, and I think I need to say it again for purposes of this session, having heard what I've heard. Trickle-down economics has actually failed us, particularly in my home in South Africa, where poverty, inequality has extended, it has become entrenched, and it affects the most marginalized people in our country. So exclusion globally, but also in South Africa, is the hallmark today. So my question to all of you, what is that new social contract that we need, that partnership that we need between citizens, business, and civil society? How do we shape that new world? Thank you.
Okay, so do we need a new social contract? Because obviously South Africa is one of the most unequal countries in the world.
We do need a social contract. And as we are having these conversations, we've largely focused on government, but that social contract includes not only government, but in a civil society it also includes those institutions within a country that work beside the government and with the government. And so the social contract not only is a contract that one makes with their government, but with their communities, with their families, with the non-government organizations. And it's going to require all of that together in order to create the civil societies that we want.
Well, I think that's a good point to take a short break. Join me for the second half of World Debate on the BBC World Service after the news.
This is the BBC World Service, where each week 4 big-name musicians discuss what matters most to them. Making music.
The aim of the show is all about the now.
Speaking to musicians from across the globe about how they make their music.
Finding out all about their creative processes.
And getting to the bottom of why they do what they do.
Do what they do.
They do what they say.
say that
I have a weird relationship to making music in the first place because my self-worth is directly connected to the work. Yeah, it's like...
Music satisfies me like nothing else. And it just makes me so happy to get out of my bed every day.
Because it is really powerful.
And, you know, it's just such a beautiful way of articulating what's on your heart.
It's almost like a vehicle to be able to express myself through my subconscious.
and as a listener,
I kind of feel like we're all connected via what we love.
Music Life, Sunday at 21 GMT.
Hello, I'm Zainab Badawi. You're listening to the World Debate on the BBC World Service. I'm on Wall Street in New York, the centre of global finance in the country which is at the heart of free market capitalism. But is the system broken? The world's richest 1% has more wealth than the rest of the world combined. Does that really matter? And if so, what should we do about it? Join me and my panel after the news to find out.
BBC News with Eileen McHugh. Police and protesters have clashed on the streets of Hong Kong as tens of thousands of people gathered to mark the 5th anniversary of the pro-democracy campaign known as the Umbrella Movement. Riot police used tear gas and water cannon to disperse protesters after some threw rocks and damaged government offices. President Trump has again accused leading Democrats of presidential harassment as an impeachment inquiry against him gathers pace. Mr. Trump described 6 Congress leaders as do-nothing Democratic savages. They include 4 women against whom he's previously been accused of using racist language. Voting has ended in Afghanistan's presidential election, but turnout is expected to be lower than last time due to security concerns. At least 1 person was killed and 27 others wounded in attacks by suspected Taliban militants. The former president of Zimbabwe, Robert Mugabe, has been buried in a simple ceremony in his home village of Kutama. Mr. Mugabe's final resting place has been the subject of a dispute between his family and the government since he died earlier this month. A judge in Brazil has issued a restraining order against the former Attorney General, Rodrigo Janot, after he admitted that he once carried a gun inside the Supreme Court to kill one of the justices. Mr. Janot, who led the prosecution for corruption of 3 former presidents, made the admission ahead of the publication of his memoirs. Wildlife officials in Sri Lanka say they found 3 more dead wild elephants, raising the number of carcasses found to 7 in the past few days. The animals were found at a forest reserve in central Sri Lanka. And Italian police have arrested a well-known Sicilian chef on suspicion of drug dealing after discovering 2 large marijuana plants in his garden. Carmelo Chiaramonte is said to have told officers he was researching new flavours. BBC News.
Welcome back to World Debate on the BBC World Service. We're discussing, does inequality really matter? Well, before we take our next question, let me quickly reintroduce our panel. The Sudanese-born businessman and philanthropist Mo Ibrahim has been described as Mr. Africa. He built a fortune in the telecoms industry and then turned to promoting development on the continent. Sigrid Kaag, Minister for Foreign Trade and Development Cooperation in the Netherlands. She has a long background in international aid through her long career at the United Nations. Kay James is president of the Heritage Foundation and influential American conservative think tank. She grew up in relative poverty in Virginia and says those experiences shaped her worldview. And John Fugelsang is an American political comedian, actor, broadcaster and commentator. He's made a documentary, in fact, to see if the American dream is still alive in the face of rising inequality. Let's go to the audience and get a point from you, Mr. Bill Gates.
There's this great focus on inequality, and that's a wonderful thing. But a lot of it's a focus within countries. You know, the Goalkeepers report shows us that the greatest inequality is between countries, where the poor countries, a child has 50 times greater chance of dying before the age of 5 than in the richer countries. So it's interesting in this atmosphere of focusing on inequality, the discussion about things like government aid that's less than 1% of budgets. We have more governments talking about becoming more isolated and less generous than talking about being more generous, even in the face of the most stark inequalities. And so
I'm curious why people think that is.
It's a very profound question. I think one of them it has a lot, if I speak to my own country within a European setting. One of them is, I think, the impact on the voice of populist leaders globally. I think there's a rise of illiberal democracies, sadly. Thirdly, I think there's also a retrenchment and putting, in a very symptomatic way, putting the blame on either the other, the immigrant, the easy labeled development cooperation hasn't worked, and is not looking in a proper way at the systems. We're living in an era where the fear of globalization and the impact on the lives of citizens, wherever they are, is seen to be so threatening that it's easier to withdraw rather than look in a very clear analytical way as how we need to actually work together internationally to deal with what Kofi Annan called the passportless problems. Global challenges won't go away. Global challenges don't respect sovereignty, let alone national borders. So it's a time to act, to give voice, and invest. And we keep doing that as the Netherlands. We're small, but we like to punch above our weight. But we need many other allies, and we use our voice this week in the UN. So the only body.
Development aid, in your view, and as you say, the Netherlands is a generous giver, is still very relevant to how we address
it's a catalytic
inequality.
It's not the only one. If you look at
in the kit,
it's an incentive, but it needs the whole community.
Okay.
Do you meet your 0.7% target?
Not yet. We're striving towards it.
When are you going to meet it?
When there's more parties like mine in government.
Let me just remind everybody.
Party, and you know.
That's 0.7% of GDP, which some countries have pledged to give in terms of overseas development aid.
So people need to meet their commitment.
So you think aid is important to addressing global inequality?
Aid is important, and also in how it is being used. In building capacity, creating jobs, job creation. Look, education and health, especially for young people, is vital, because that's what will meet things. Let me just say something. This is not just a charity. People need to understand, in this global world, we all depend on each other. If we have a well-to-do middle class, large middle class in Africa, that is wonderful for your business, guys. Right. Right.
You have to understand that.
Now, in Europe, there is hysteria about migration.
I know.
The best way to deal with migration is not by having this armada of military boats in the Mediterranean, but creating jobs in Africa for those.
All right. So that's John
and
then Kay.
It's also a system of safety. Absolutely, corporations can do a lot as they view these societies as emerging markets. And a living wage workforce that can afford to buy stuff will help the corporation and the region as well. But it is also about aid. And we have to reframe aid as not being charity, but creating a safer world, especially as climate change makes resources more scarce, makes poverty more extreme. You will see more terrorism. And there's a strong argument to be made that foreign aid to these areas will increase world safety, because if everyone does better, everyone does better.
Okay, are you proponents of aid to address inequality issues?
Aid, of course, is important, and it's significant. And charitable people want to help. Charitable governments want to help. And they want to put money where they think that it can really change people's lives. However, it is so important that as we give this aid, that we are giving it with full knowledge and understanding. When we go into certain countries and we give aid, we want to know that that aid is going where it's intended to go. It's not going into corrupt government. It's not going into people's pockets. We want the aid to get to the people who desperately need it. The other thing that jumps out at me as we look at our index, our economic index, you think that it's just, you know, who's making money, who's not making money. But what struck me as a person who cares deeply about making sure that poor people are lifted up, that we have clean water to drink, that we have access to health care, that we care about our climate, we discover that in the countries, and if you list them, I encourage everybody to go look at it. It's one of the most fascinating pieces of data. The more economic freedom that exists in a country, the higher human flourishing is. The climate is better, education is better, access to health care is better. And so one of the things, transparency in government is key, and getting rid of corruption in government is key, because we want to send the aid in, and we want to see human flourishing.
John, you looking a bit dubious?
No, I actually agree with a great amount of it, because but I think that we can look to the Netherlands, we can look to the fact that the American dream has become the Scandinavian dream in many cases, where people, in America, our problems with access to health care, our problems with student loan debt. You can't climb an economic ladder with 400 pounds of debt on your back. And America is a great leader on many of these issues, but sadly, we're at a time when America is a great model to the rest of the world on things not to do. And I've looked to, that's no disrespect to my country, it's my love of country that makes me say it, because we know what works. The question is, the problem's not corporations, the problem is human greed, which can be regulated.
John, we need to go mano on health care, on student loan debt, and the things that you bring up, because there are answers to those things and why there are problems in this country.
You all said that aid is one of the tools in the development kit and in trying to address inequality and so on. I just want to ask you, Sigrid, I mean, the World Bank obviously gives soft loans to a lot of developing countries and so on, and the IMF as well. I mean, but are these institutions fit for purpose? Do you think that they are really doing what they should be doing to try to reduce inequality?
Well, we're shareholders. We certainly like to make sure that they do. I think so, but I mean, what I meant by aid being catalytic, because it's only a small percentage of the total financing that is required. We've got the private sector, civil society, but also we've got really the investments that are needed, overseas development investment. And then you need the enabling environment, which is not corrupt or fosters development, targets. The international institutions such as the World Bank or the IMF and its economic advice are extremely important, because it's a scorecard. They can set the pace. We rely a lot on the World Bank to give the proper advice on the sectors to invest in, but it's not enough. We believe in the big partnerships, not only by the local governments at national level, but also internationally. And we try to engineer more and more with the private sector, the big investors, to get social impact investing, and also in the hard-to-go areas, such as humanitarian crises, because the needs are going up. The duration of a crisis is protracted, but the money is never enough. Any emergency appeal is at 30 or 40% max in the first year of a crisis, which lasts sometimes 20 years. That's a generation of people with no hope, no access. So you need to well these sort of blended finance, innovative source of financing. They're big tickets. And ODA, Overseas Development Assistance, is only the oil. That's it.
Let's go to a question from our audience. Katie Eder, who's Executive Director of Future Coalition, that's a youth-led organizations in the United States.
Hi. Climate change is one of, if not the largest drivers and contributors to the world's growing inequality. On Friday, we saw over 4 million young people across the world take to the streets to demand that our world leaders take action to address this. So my question for you is, as the climate crisis worsens, what do you think should and can be done to ensure that those who are most impacted have the support and resources they need, and those who are most privileged don't simply just leave them behind?
Yeah. I mean,
it's about climate justice and how you get climate justice, those who have the greatest impact on them, how they're not left behind.
I was tremendously inspired by a youth-led global movement, because we are counting on millennials and those younger than them to address this problem, as we've seen the older generation, at least in this country, still has this ridiculous debate on the actual science. People in our country say, oh, you believe in climate change. No, not belief. Do you believe the sky is blue? It's science. It's not about belief. And yet America... My country should be the leader on this, and we have many leaders on this, but our government still does not do it. It's going to have to be a Martin Luther King situation. It's going to have to be people leading until the leaders follow by applying direct pressure, boycotts if necessary, public shaming if necessary. Every individual can do something to move the needle on this in every society on the world, because that's the only way we'll see progress. The leaders have to be led.
Mary Brahim?
We did not put the carbon up there. You guys bought it. Then we have the word. So please, I'm for climate justice. I love it. And I'm glad to hear that.
But there's been concrete proposals put forward. Antonio Guterres, the United Nations Secretary General, says he wants to really try to revivify the climate fund and to make sure that $100 billion is raised to make sure that those living in the least developed countries do get some money into this fund. I mean, do you think that these kinds of solutions are going to work, really?
Of course they are. And I don't know anyone, I truly don't know anyone who is not committed to addressing this issue.
The President of the United States. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, I think that was a cheap shot.
It's not against you.
He said it was you said it was a cheap shot. You said it wasn't against
Our president calls it a hoax created by China. This is very serious. It's not against you, I promise.
Yeah. Well, if you look at what our country is doing, we have some of the cleanest waters and the cleanest air on the planet, and are contributing far less to what we see happening globally. Having said that, I don't want my grandchildren drinking dirty water or breathing dirty air. So we're all in this together. We're committed to it. And I agree that what we should be doing is looking at the countries that are contributing the most to this, holding them accountable.
Per
capita. And holding them accountable, and we should be all in this together. And I don't think it serves us well to try to take pot shots at any one country. Who doesn't?
Not a pot shot to the country, but I mean, don't tell me that you care about the unborn and then deny climate science, because we're fighting for the unborn on this. It's not against you whatsoever. And America, we know the pollution that has gotten so much better in our country in the last 40 years. You can see the skyline in Los Angeles now. We know that we can take action collectively as a people and make change happen.
Okay, but I mean, the question was also between countries, not just within countries. And as Mo said, Africa feels the impact of global warming, and it only accounts for about 2 or 3% of global carbon emissions. And so that's where the inequality
I think we have an obligation to share technology with those countries. I think we have an obligation to share science with those countries. I think we have a responsibility to share what we know and support them, bring them along, because it is a real issue that needs to be really addressed.
On clean technology. Sigrid, on climate, and then just perhaps to put your comments in the fact that, what we're talking about now is very much looking at the impact and the outcomes of inequality, not just in terms of access to finance and that kind of thing.
No, I think the question is very pertinent. And you said, can it be done? Is it feasible? It's a yes. And it's not even a luxury. It's not even a matter of do we want it or not. It's necessity. It's do or die globally. Secondly, it has to be a race to the top. There's no point to point to countries who are less ambitious on the goals. We've got to lead from the top. Leadership is required. Antonio Guterres has done that. And the financing is one, access to technology, the expertise, but also the investments required. And yes, we can't blame Niger for all the climate adaptation needs we have, because Niger would have wished it had the chance to have the type of industry that is polluted enough, because it means it would have been a wealthy country. And there is a total imbalance in our actions, but every country has nationally determined contributions. That's where we can assist. But of course, the big players need to take the biggest share. Where it happens, the European Union, the European countries are doing that too. We're looking at establishing a Green Deal, which requires a change in how we produce and how we consume, and this is a lifestyle change as much as it is a political choice.
All right, and also related to this question is the fact that actually in so many African countries, access to energy is non-existent. You mentioned Niger, and about 2% of the population actually has access to electricity. And so that is a grave state of affairs. You have energy poverty in so many parts of the world. Just putting it out there.
And impacted the most by the effects of climate change already. Droughts, deforestation, everything is happening there already. And then we're surprised that people migrate. Everybody looks for an opportunity and the chance to survive.
Are you saying that's a direct outcome
of inequality?
Okay. You're getting a lot of applause here today, Sigrid Karg. Well, let's talk about another outcome of inequality and how the manifestations that affect every country. Christina Lunz is director in Germany for the Center for Feminist Foreign Policy and also an advisor to the German government. What do you want to say to the panel?
Hi. The feminist movement that, amongst others, fights for gender equality, at its very core being hugely critical of the capitalist system and neoliberal policies as it keeps pushing political minorities, amongst which women are the biggest group, to the margins. I'm wondering whether under the current economic system we will ever achieve equality. Isn't most gender equality work really only pinkwashing if we aren't fixing the very basic assumptions our current economic system is built on?
Okay, so, I mean, basically, to sum it up, if you don't mind my saying so, it's the economic system in whichever country basically loaded against women, which is one of the reasons behind gender inequality. Who wants to kick off on that? You see, I'm not saying ladies. And the point she's also making, Christina said, is that this will never change until that system is fixed.
Well, you know, I think that's a very good question, but it's a very complex one. And it is complex because we're talking about this globally. And so the systems are so very different in so many different countries based on not only economic systems, but based on religion. In some countries that have religious traditions which really hold women back and deny them opportunity. So I think the solution is going to be as complex as the question is.
But do you accept that the economic system really doesn't operate to the benefit of women?
I would say that that's
generally speaking
absolutely true in many countries. Personally, for me, having come out of poverty in this country and had the opportunity to use wisdom, knowledge, education, contacts, experiences in order to grow and achieve, I have seen what this country has to offer. Not every country has those opportunities. So it is complex in terms of where you are on the planet, what your particular religious traditions may or may not be, what economic systems you're under. So there is no easy answer to that. But does it exist? Absolutely it exists. Does it exist somewhere even in this country? Absolutely it does. And we will continue this battle for many years to come.
Who agrees with that? Or do you feel that there are some solutions which have universal application regardless of where you're talking about gender inequality, be it Africa, Asia, Middle East, Europe, the Americas, or whatever?
Yeah, I don't think it's an economic system issue. It's a cultural issue, I think. In societies, I mean, if I speak about Africa, and I think many of it will be relevant to other societies, I think we have issues with some of our cultures, which assume a girl has to be a good wife and it's not important to go to school. She should have as many children as possible because a fertile woman is a good woman. So we have a serious fight here. We have not only women issues, but we have issues with gay people. In Africa, we have a terrible xenophobic view about it. So we need to understand that elements of our cultures can be really bad, and people have to stand up and deal with it. So this is
exclusion. One of the things that leads to
we should be using all the other things, economics and otherwise.
So this is one of the main drivers of inequality.
But we're also in a period of tremendous advancement for women.
Let me just say, John Sang.
Okay, thank you. We're in a period of tremendous advancement for women. The majority of Americans voted for a woman to be president in 2016. We've seen women lead and not wait again. But the solution's obviously educate women, empower women, listen to women, elect women, and amounts of foreign aid can and should be tied to cultures that lift women up and do not oppress them. It's not that complicated.
Thank you, Richard.
I completely agree with everything that was internationally said by John. That is appropriate. Equally so, I think it's all about power and access to money, but also we need to have the right policies. What we've done now in our politics, as what you said, in our policies, we gender mark everything. In investments, in trade, in assistance, in anything we do with our money or our politics is gender marked. With KPI, we benchmark everything. If it doesn't pass the test, won't happen. Equally so, to advance the status of women in politics, sometimes you need a quota. A temporary, provisional one to break through the glass ceiling. The Netherlands, okay, I'm not talking about the Netherlands now, but we've never had a female prime minister. We're considered to be a progressive country. You need to see women all over, and you need to lean in the way has happened in many countries. Otherwise it won't happen. Women need role models.
Women leaders don't necessarily always have an impact on gender. Yeah, I mean, one of the criticisms.
And a lot of mediocre men, the assumption of mediocre men is they get there, they're chosen. But women have to work 3 times as hard.
All right, let me just get a show of hands here. Who feels that the economic system, wherever they may be, is loaded against women? Put your hands up. I would say an overwhelming majority. Who thinks so? Well, it doesn't. Well, just the odd brave hand has gone up, but okay, a clear overwhelming majority there. Just finally and very briefly, what would success in 20 years' time in tackling inequality look like to you? Briefly, Dr. Mo Ibrahim.
I think if governments stand up, the problem is every conference I've been to, every political leader I heard the last few years was talking about inequality. None of those guys told us what we're going to do about it. So what? I don't see any proposal or 1, 2, 3, 4 in order to deal with inequality. But everybody shout about inequality. And it's time for us to see how we're going to deal with that. And from the outset, by you saying inequality, I cannot imagine a society where everybody is earning the same. We don't mean that. It's not, Zainab, you're not earning as much as your cameraman, for example.
Well, I don't know what he earns, but some people say tax the rich 90%, for example.
But just for the sake of being scientific, that there always going to be some inequality in society. What we're talking for is about reasonable inequality, not excessive. But I love to see proposals. 1, 2, 3, 4. Nobody is coming with proposals.
Okay, Jane?
What success looks like to me is that my granddaughter, my grandson, will have the opportunity to live in a world where we have actually put forward, as you have suggested, the real solutions. And what it looks like is that we tackle inequality at the government level, at the community level, but not only economically and not only through governments, but in our own lives and how we treat each other. And so I think it starts with the individual, and I think it starts with a one-person campaign to say we're going to rid this.
Thank you. John Fugelsang.
In 20 years, if everyone on this globe understands that poverty hurts all of us, we will have made progress. We've made so much already. Universal basic income is a very controversial idea that is only going to become more popular and more discussed. If you give a poor man $1 at the beginning of the day, it'll be in the rich man's hand by the end of the day, but he will have stimulated a local economy and fed his family during the day. Having lived in America through the gay rights movement and seeing how we went from a plague to marriage equality in 30 years, the swiftest advancement of civil rights for any oppressed group ever, I have so much faith in humans and our collective love for each other.
John Fugelsang, thank you very much indeed, and indeed thank you to all my panel and to all my audience here at the Lincoln Center in New York. I hope wherever you're listening or watching around the world that perhaps we've shed some light on a rather difficult issue that affects every country in the world. From me, Zainab Badawi, and the rest of the BBC World Debate team, goodbye.
This is the BBC World Service, looking at the global trade in selling citizenship.
It's part of our identity, but that doesn't mean you can't change it.
Young clients, they maybe buy 3 or 4 passports.
Selling citizenship is a booming industry. We explore why so many want an alternative nationality.
You pay your money, you get your passport.
How to buy your own country. Tuesday at 12:30 and 21 GMT. And in 30 minutes, the Cultural Frontline with Tina Dahili. We ask,
70 years after the birth of the People's Republic, how does China's culture reflect the life of its people? Plus, the superstar producer Corsac on creating dance music that makes 1 billion people happy.
This is the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
BBC World Service at 1900 GMT. This is Hassan Aruni in London with Focus on Africa.